Welcome to the Princh Library Lounge. I'm your host, Vicky Woolbarn, and I'm joining you from the Princh headquarters in Aarhus, Denmark. Here on the Princh Library Lounge, we have insightful conversations with library professionals from around the world, where they will share their thoughts on topics that are important and impactful to the library community. We hope you enjoy the episode, so let's get to it. The Princh Library Lounge is brought to you by Princh, the preferred printing solution in Scandinavia. Princh is a user-friendly printing solution made for libraries with libraries. Check out princh.com for more details. Hey everyone, and thank you for joining us on episode 2 of the Princh Library Lounge. I'm very excited today to welcome both Beth Crist and Meg DePriest, who will discuss their thoughts on the topic of library fines. Beth is a Youth and Family Services librarian at Colorado State Library, and Meg is a library consultant at California State Library as well. Before we get going, then I'm just going to throw it over to both Beth and Meg to tell us a little bit more about themselves and probably do themselves more justice than I did. So Beth, could we maybe start off with you?
Sure. I am Beth Crist. I've been the Youth and Family Services consultant at the Colorado State Library in Denver for about 7.5 years. And I work on projects like the Summer Learning Program and a great program where we circulate backpacks, nature backpacks with state park passes in libraries across the state. And one of the areas that I'm really passionate about and work a lot in is finding and removing barriers to folks using the library. So why is it that people don't use the library? What are those barriers that they face? Sometimes it's not always obvious. And so really delving into that and then figuring out how to remove those barriers for better access.
That's great, thank you. And Meg, what about you?
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having us today. As you mentioned, I am a consultant working on projects right now for the California State Library. But before moving to California, I worked for Beth at the Colorado State Library on an early literacy grant that she wrote. And in the research component of the grant, there were focus groups with parents of young children. And they reported that fines and fees were a barrier to their use of their libraries. So I was put to the task of seeing what kind of data there might be in the professional and research literature examining the effect of fines and fees on borrowing behavior. And that lit review became the Colorado State Library's white paper advocating for the elimination of fines and fees on children's materials. And Beth and I have been watching this movement of dropping late fines take off as public libraries all over the country are joining in.
Great, thank you both so much. And yeah, just to maybe set the scene a little bit before I hand back over to you. So I think it would be fair to say that there's been a debate going on in the library world for some time about whether there should be library fines. And with more and more libraries, I feel like recently have been moving away from them. The debate has come to the forefront and centre again. And just like any debate, any discussion, there's always two sides. So some people think that they're necessary for some reasons, and then others, like you mentioned, believe that they're not necessary. So Meg, could you just tell us a little bit more about your take on fines and just generally what side of the fence you sit on?
Sure. First, I think it's important that we define our terms, just because not everyone uses the same language when talking about fines and fees. When we talk about fines, we're talking about the charges you incur when you return your materials late to the library. They accrue each day until you return your books or your materials, and they're usually small. Library Journal reported that they average around 17 cents per day in public libraries. But they do add up. And in many instances, libraries will at some point block your account if you haven't paid your fines. So that's what we're talking about. Fees, on the other hand, are the money you pay if you damage a book or lose it, or it needs to be replaced. Fees can also refer to the cost of using things like the copy machine at the library. So when we're talking today about fines, we're talking about late fines.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here and say that traditionally, speaking to your question, Vicky, which is a really good one, there are three main reasons that libraries charge overdue fines. One is to bring in revenue. Another is to get materials back on time or even at all, and to teach responsibility. And in our research, we've really found out that all three of these reasons are just incorrect assumptions. Um, and the more important reason to eliminate overdue fines is to provide more equitable library service for everyone in each community. Overdue fines are really punitive because they affect people in low income situations the most. And in many cases, these people, who are the very people that need library services the most, don't use the library because the fines make it prohibitive for them to do so. And I'm going to tell some stories that we learned. Meg referenced our SPELL program before. This was supporting parents in early literacy through libraries. It was a grant-funded program funded through Institute of Museum and Library Services. And so we did these surveys and focus groups with parents in low-income households. And we heard some really heartbreaking stories from these parents. One of them said that she takes her kids to the library and she loves using the library, but she never lets them check out books because they might take them home, and then she knows they couldn't get back to the library for a long time, and they couldn't afford those overdue fines because of transportation, and sometimes they just get so busy they can't come back to the library. And another parent told us another heartbreaking story. She said she does let her kids check out books, and they love to check out books, but as soon as she gets home, she puts them high up on a shelf where the kids can't reach them because she's afraid that the kids will lose them or they'll get damaged, and then they won't be able to pay for those late fines or replacement fees. So, it really, really does affect these kids who are the ones that need access to books the most.
Yeah, that sounds really sad. But can I just maybe pick you up on, so you brought up 3 points, and I can just hear in the back of my head some people saying, there's budget cuts everywhere. It seems like it's affecting every library in every country. So what kind of advice would you maybe give to people that maybe want to do this, but just see it as a cutback in their revenue, something that they just can't afford? What would you maybe say to them?
Sure. That's a great point, and we definitely hear that a lot. It can be frightening, right, to lose this source of revenue. But again, in our research, we found that it actually isn't as big of a revenue generator as most people assume. In U.S. public libraries, what we're finding is that the income revenue generated from overdue fines is on average only about 1% of a library's total operating budget. So it's very small to begin with. And then when the cost of collecting all those dimes and quarters is added up in terms of credit card fees, postage for overdue notices, collection agency fees, and especially staff time, it really ends up being cost neutral in many cases. So no revenue is actually lost. And in fact, some libraries actually report that collecting fines costs more than what they bring in when they eliminate their fines.
Yeah, and if I can jump in, I think it's important to mention that there are also other costs associated with charging overdue fines. For many library staff members, the process of collecting and enforcing fines can prove really stressful. And the Library Journal did a survey that indicated that library staff feel like there's enough combat going on in libraries right now without having to engage in this adversarial conversation with users. Librarians interested in eliminating overdue fines discuss the negative impression it leaves on users. They dislike how it reinforces the stereotype of libraries and librarians being stern or punitive. So we try to remain welcoming to the community and relevant to their lives in pursuit of knowledge, and collecting overdue fines doesn't help foster a warm relationship. So that's kind of another, not monetary, but another cost associated with collecting fines.
Yeah, I can imagine there maybe being a sense of shame as well when you have to bring something back and that you're facing that fine when you get through the door, and I can imagine that it can be quite embarrassing as well. So I of course understand the argument there for sure. But maybe just to pick you up on another one of your 3 points as well, about teaching responsibility. I think that I read in an article somewhere about, there's just this very basic social contract between library services and the patron that does take out, whether it be a book or a DVD or some other item. And it's just a very basic contract that they just have to return it on time and that it's not damaged. And really, do you think libraries are responsible for teaching those kind of skills to people?
No. That is certainly a reason given often, is that libraries need to teach responsibility. But really, when you look at it, how many kids, young children, and even teens can get to the library on their own to return the library materials on time? So how is that even teaching responsibility to begin with? The kids are the ones being penalized for something they can't even do on their own. It's really not even teaching responsibility.
Yeah, and I think, the San Francisco Public Library recently released a white paper in their advocacy work for eliminating late fines in their system. And they address this teaching responsibility in a really lovely way. They argued that if the library does have a role in teaching public responsibility, it must do so in a way that doesn't interfere with the library's mission. And I'm quoting their white paper here. They say, responsibility is an important value for individuals and communities to practice, but not one that permits the library to overlook its essential function. If there is a conflict between teaching responsibility and ensuring equal access, the library is duty-bound to prioritize equal access. I couldn't put that better myself. Go back to the mission of the library. I don't know. I'm totally speaking off the cuff here. I don't know of any library that has in their mission to teach people responsibility. That's not the mission of the library.
So then, just to go back to another one of your points as far as to get the materials back on time, could you maybe just tell us a little bit more about what you found out there? Maybe it's not necessary to get the books back in circulation. Do you maybe have examples?
Sure, I can tackle that. So the argument that late fines get people to return their stuff on time, that's kind of one of the major reasons people think that late fines exist. When I did that lit review of our profession's academic journals for the CSL white paper, I was hoping to find studies where people had actually tested this supposition. And it turns out there really weren't many at all, especially in public libraries. I found a few studies conducted in North Carolina that compared the circulation and return rates of libraries that charge late fines and then libraries that don't. And there was virtually no difference in late return rates between the two types of libraries. The researchers did find that small fines had no effect on late return rates, but steep ones did. So unless libraries want to charge $10 a day for an item, charging late fines aren't really effective.
And then we've really been following libraries who have gone fine-free recently. And so many of them have done really excellent job of tracking the return rates before going fine-free and after. And they have really found out that return rates are the same. They have not changed. And we've even heard testimonials from some libraries that they get more materials back after going fine-free because of two reasons. One is that some people are ashamed to bring stuff back late. And if they have to face the library staff to pay a fine, they might just not do so and keep the book. And two, of course, some people just can't afford to pay the fine. So they figure, why bother bringing the materials back at all if they can't pay the fine and use the library?
In Colorado, in the High Plains Library District, they remove fines on everything except DVDs. Then they track their circulation, and after 6 months, they found that 95% of materials were being returned within a week of when they were due. They found no increase in what we call patron disappoints, which refers to the scenario when someone has put a hold on an item and is waiting for the previous borrower to return it. And they reported that dropping late fines didn't negatively affect that experience of other users in the library. And on top of that, their circulation of children's materials went up 16%. And then one other thing I wanted to mention is after a colleague of ours helped us and put together this big map and asked libraries, through Twitter and everywhere, asked libraries to put themselves on this map, we heard from quite a few libraries that have been fine-free for years, or even since they've opened to the public. So I asked a few of them about their hold times, because a lot of people are skeptical about dropping late fines. They're concerned that patrons waiting in line for books will have to wait longer. And as I suspected, the circulation statistics for libraries that have never charged late fines are not significantly different from those that do. So it's just another piece of evidence that charging a late fine is not affecting when someone returns an item. It does not have, there's no statistical effect of having late fines on whether or not books come back to the library on time.
Okay, great. And I'm just out of interest as well. Do you think that this eliminating fines is only relevant to public libraries, or do you think that it should be for all libraries, including academic as well?
It's funny. We just, because of the nature of what Beth and I do, we tend to focus more on public libraries and are more familiar with and knowledgeable about those. But I will tell you that when I was diving into the literature, academic libraries are also examining late fines and students borrowing behaviors. And they actually, probably by the nature, because they're academics, there are a few more studies in the literature about that. And what I saw was, in academic settings, they're finding similar results, that upping late fines, lowering late fines. Even there was one study that offered rewards to students, like gift cards and things, to see if they could get materials back. They found no effect. So even the existence of a reward did not affect students' borrowing behavior. And we did hear from a few academic schools when Andy Woodworth put that request out on Twitter. And there are schools that are very proud, particularly K through 12. School librarians are very proud that they don't charge late fines, because they see it affecting their relationship with the students' relationship with the library, and the students' access to resources.
Yeah, and the school libraries, it is definitely a growing conversation within that community as well, and I think it will catch on to libraries, all types of libraries. I really do. It is maybe slow to come, but I think it will catch on across the board.
That's great to hear, because I remember from when I was at university, I'll say punishment for not bringing back your books is that you wouldn't be allowed to graduate. So that's quite extreme.
Ouch, right. And what was your relationship with the library after they tell you can't graduate? That's a great way to send a student out into the world, huh?
Yeah, I was scared to go back. So I can totally understand the sense of maybe, I didn't get to that point, of course. I graduated, I'm pleased to say. But it was in their, it was on their website, and I can definitely see the sense of shame of walking in and giving your books back because you were scared that you weren't going to graduate. That's upsetting.
And I think, that's kind of a good thing to kind of revisit, is this whole, what do those kind of punitive, what do those sanctions do to the relationship or people's ability or tendency to come to the library? Researchers going back to public libraries, researchers have reported that libraries in economically disadvantaged areas of cities have significantly lower circulation rates than middle-class neighborhoods. And library users are reluctant to check out books because they fear having to pay overdue fines. Low-income caregivers surveyed in our research with SPELL identified library fines and fees as one of the factors preventing them from using the library. At a time when libraries fight to showcase their relevance and importance in the community, we should be welcoming all library users, not establishing policies that turn them away, that scare them, that induce a sense of shame, and then reduce usage.
Yeah, and I think that, it goes back to your earlier point as well, that it's really turning away the people that really do need the libraries as well. Mm-hmm. That's what they're there for.
Right. Beth, do you want to go back to the fact that, so when libraries drop fines, sometimes they see some really amazing things happen. And Beth, maybe you want to talk about Salt Lake and San Rafael and some of those.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so indeed, when libraries eliminate fines, many of them see really positive benefits. For instance, the Salt Lake City Library in Utah saw checkouts increase 10%, and their number of borrowers also increased 10%. The San Rafael Public Library in California reported an increase of their children's materials and a 40% increase in youth borrowers after dropping late fines for children's materials. Both libraries reported hold times, which is a good measure of late returns, were virtually unchanged. And since they removed this ineffective policy, their circulation increased and they had more borrowers discovering the library. And again, we do know several libraries have done excellent studies that show how people in the disadvantaged areas really do have a much lower rate of borrowing and having library cards. And we think fines is a big reason for that. We have a colleague in New Jersey, Andy Woodworth. He has recently created this wonderful map. It's a great visual way to show the very rapidly growing number of libraries around the world that have removed fines on at least children's materials. There are mostly public libraries, as we mentioned before, but there are some academic and K-12 schools as well. We would love to see that list continue and grow. And if you're anyone listening, if your library has gone fine-free already or is about to, we also have a section for those for whom going fine-free is pending. There is a way that you can get your library on the map. So it's a great visual. There are about 350 libraries on it already. Most are in the US, but there are some in other parts of the world as well.
And you can find that map at the website. It's endlibraryfines.info.
Awesome, thank you so much. And maybe just one final question. Say that I work in a library authority and I'm totally convinced I want to get rid of library fines tomorrow. What would be my next step, or what would be my next few steps? What advice would you give me to maybe bring it to my local authority or my director and say, hey, like, this is a great idea. What would I do?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that some libraries have done for administration boards, community members, municipal entities, and/or staff that are perhaps apprehensive about going totally fine-free, some have found it more successful to first eliminate fines on children's materials and then track the return rates and the fine revenues, circulation statistics, and community feedback for 6 months or a year. And then what tends to happen is it's so successful with none of the negative effects feared that total fine elimination is a logical and much easier next step. So sometimes starting with that smaller pilot project has been really successful. So that's one way to go.
Yeah, Beth and I have spent the last few years answering questions about this in webinars, articles, blog posts. Our message is always the same. Library staff can advocate for policy change. You just need to get all of your ducks in a row. We really encourage them, as Beth said, to gather data about their library circulation, to look at where blocked accounts are more common in their service area. If they're higher in areas where residents are facing economic hardship, as many libraries find, that's important information to communicate to your governing board. We encourage them to understand their library's budget and the costs associated with collecting fines. And to collect input and stories from users, people who are using the library, and then frontline staff who have all those interactions with the users. And to use things like the white paper we produced and the many articles that have been published in the last few years to really build their case.
And there have been some libraries that have produced really excellent advocacy pieces that are visually based, really rich infographics to make the case to eliminate fines. And they found that helpful to bring to their governing bodies and communities to have that information compiled in a compelling visual format. And another excellent new advocacy tool, just over a month old now, is the American Library Association's resolution, just passed in January. It is their resolution on monetary library fines as a form of social inequity. This exciting document states that fines are a barrier to library use and access to information. It urges libraries to scrutinize their practices of imposing fines on library patrons and actively move toward eliminating them, and urges governing bodies of libraries to strengthen funding support for libraries so they are not dependent on monetary fines as a source of revenue. And so that can be a really powerful piece. I mean, this is a major library association. And since they have put this forward, we are really hoping that libraries can use that as a really strong advocacy piece.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, thank you both so much. That just wraps up today's conversation on library fines. So thank you so much for very useful insights. I've certainly learned a lot, and I think that everyone listening to this will do as well. But just in case people listening have any questions or want to follow up with you in any way, is there a place where maybe they could reach out to you or get in contact?
Yeah, we can certainly, I'm willing to provide my email, crist@cde.state.co.us. Please feel free to email me with questions. We can provide lots of resources as well.
Yes, and you can find me at Meg J. DePriest. That's MEGJDEPRIEST @gmail.com. And we love to hear from people about this.
That's great. Thank you both so much. And look forward to hearing responses from everyone on this topic.
Thanks for having us, Vicky.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks again for listening to the Princh Library Lounge. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe and spread the word to other library professionals. If you want to learn more about today's episode, check out the Princh Library Lounge website at princh.com/podcast. We will be back next month with the next episode, and until then, happy librarying!